Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special Zazenkai this evening with Abbot Muho of Antaiji. It is so good to have everyone here. Muho, can you hear all right? You can hear me all right?
You're talking with me?
Yeah, you can hear?
Yes, yes, I hear.
All right.
Can
And
you hear me?
everyone out there, we have two groups of everyone else out there. Give a wave if you can hear. Give a wave to Muho. And a big gasho if you would. We have we have two computers running this evening. I'm going to invite some of the people on the waiting list to come into group one if you wish, because we have a couple of open seats there. So if you were on the waiting list and you'd like to come into group one, you may at this time. Muho, I know this is really the middle of the night for you because you usually would be in bed about this time. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock here, and this is around the time when people start to sleep. So some of us are already asleep. And actually, there's four. Not only me, there's five of us sitting here. So there's four that stayed awake, but the other half of the time are with 10 right now. So five are already asleep again. Five are awake.
I'm going to ask you, you're going to have to get closer to your microphone for your talk, I think.
Okay, well, shall I speak in a bigger voice, or if I get close, you can't see me? Or, well, you can see part of me.
Yeah, that's good. Try again. This is how we do things around here. We improvise at the last minute. Oh.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
There you are. Good. Well, with that in mind, I thought we'd begin with 30 minutes of Zazen, and I will have about 5 minutes of Kinhin, and then I will turn everything over to you. I just think everyone here has already read much about you, about Antaiji. It is a very, very special place, as you know, in all our corner of the Soto world, because even though we're not part of your lineage, we feel so close to Kodo Sawaki Roshi and Uchiyama Roshi. And so Antaiji is kind of a mecca for us. And so we are very, very safe. It's a very, very special night to have you here. With that in mind, let us just sit. I will ring the bell and we'll sit for 30 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you for having me. And yeah, that's it.
We will now have a few minutes of Kinhin. We also have some open places in group 2. If some of our priests would like to come in to sit, there are places for you. We will now have a talk by Abbot Muho. Very good. All come together here. I'm going to just turn everything over to Muho now, just with a small reminder to speak loudly. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. The first time I'm sitting then on the internet. Good experience. Maybe I would like to talk about how I got into Zazen in the first place and how I ended up becoming the Abbot of Antalya. My first encounter with Zazen was when I was 16. At the time, I was living in a boarding school in Germany. And at that boarding school, there was a Zen meditation circle. They called it meditation in the style of Zen. One of the teachers there was into Zen, and he invited all of the students who participated in meditation. That was in 1984. And at the time, I didn't know anything about meditation, but somehow I connected meditation with people that levitate or that claim they can levitate. And also one big thing at the time in Germany was Sri Rajanishi, who was called Bhagwan at the time. Later he changed his name to Osho. And his followers, there were lots of followers in Germany as well. They dressed in orange and they had their special discos. And on TV you could see the Bhagwan riding in Rolls Royce. So anyway, when I heard Zen or meditation, I couldn't tell the difference to these guys that are levitating and gurus that are sitting in Rolls Royce. So I was kind of a little suspicious and said, no, thank you, not for me. And I think most of the students at the school thought the same way. So the teacher had a hard time getting people interested. So there were very, very few people in the meditation circle. So 2 weeks after that, once more he approached me and said, well, why don't you try it after all? And as it was already the second time, I was even more kind of dubious. Well, how come it comes the second time? I said, no, thank you, I'm not into that. So he asked, well, have you tried it before? And I said, no, of course not, and I have no intention to do it. And then he said, well, if you never tried it, how can you say you're not interested? You have to try once, and then you can stop it if you're not interested. And I have nothing to say against that, because obviously he was right. If you never try, how can you say it isn't interesting? So I decided to go there once and then stop. And that is basically the reason why I ended up sitting here now as a Zen monk. I had thought I would stop after the very first time, but somehow I ended up going each time. I think we did it 2 or 3 times a week. What kept me going was that for the first time in my life, I realized that I have a body and that I'm connected to this body. Of course, every kid knows that we need a body, and well, we can only live in this world with a body. But I thought, well, what defines me is what I'm thinking here in my head. This is me. And I need a heart to pump blood to the brain, and I need lungs to absorb oxygen. But if you would cut my neck and you could attach some machine to this head that would do the same job that my lungs and my heart would do, wouldn't really change me, because as long as what happens in my brain isn't changing, I'm the same person. And doing Zazen, for the first time in my life, I felt that might actually not be true. That actually what is happening below my neck is just as well part of me as what is happening above my neck. Before doing Zazen for the first time, for example, in class, in school, I was always sitting like this. on my desk or like that. And from time to time, my teachers would tell me, well, boy, you have a bad posture. What I would say is, well, who cares? Who cares? As long as I listen to what you say and as long as I can reproduce it in the test, who cares about my posture? And doing Zazen for, well, I think we sat for about 25 minutes or so at a time, just as we did right now. Sitting with a straight spine, the neck straight for 25 minutes actually makes a difference. That was my first realization. And of course, I knew that I need to breathe to stay alive. But doing Zazen for the first time, I actually felt the breath. I felt myself breathing. I felt to a certain degree how the blood circulates. I felt some sensation. When you sit still, you become quiet, then you notice all those sounds that usually you wouldn't hear, like the birds outside the window, you hear the rain. And at first it was just this simple realization that it's not only here that I am, but I'm connected to this body, and this body is connected to the outside world. The sounds that I hear, what I see, that's also part of me, also connected to myself. So I kept coming back to Zazen for about a year. After 1 year, that teacher that was responsible for the Zen circle quit the school. And that time, he approached me and said, why don't you continue as the responsible person for the circle? Because obviously you couldn't find any other teachers that would run that meditation. And I, at first, was very surprised that he would ask me, because after the meditation, we would do something that usually you don't do in Zen circles. He would ask each one, how was it for you? What did you experience? What he would tell us before the Zen is that we should find our center. He would always tell us, find your center and then stay in that center. So he would go around asking people, did you find your center? And people would say, yes, yes, I found my center. What did you find there? And one person would say, well, I saw a beautiful meadow with flowers, and I walked through this meadow with flowers. And another person would say, well, today I saw a golden pendulum swinging in my center. I was watching this golden pendulum swing. And I was always the only person who had to say sorry, but I'm not yet quite sure where that center is. And I didn't really experience anything, but just feeling connected to my body was so good that please allow me to come back. And after 1 year, I still wasn't quite sure what the center actually is. I guess my teacher meant the hara region, whatever. Even though I could feel my hara, I didn't see any golden pendulums or anything there. So I was surprised that he would ask me to be responsible for the meditation circle. So I went to a library and would borrow all the books that they would have there on Buddhism, on Zen. And well, on Buddhism in general, they had the old German translations of the Pali scriptures that told you about the story of the Buddha and how he realized that life is suffering, and how he was looking for a way to get out of suffering and then meditating under the Bodhi tree. And then there were the books by D.T. Suzuki that said that, well, the Buddha passed on the teaching to his disciples, and they again passed it on, and eventually from India it was transmitted to China, and from there it came to Japan, and even today it's practiced in Zen monasteries. And if you practice hard enough, you might actually reach Satori. And what Satori is cannot be expressed in words, but in short, it's the solution to all problems. And that got me very interested. Part of that, or reason because I was then very interested, is because my mother died when I was 7 years old. And from a very young age, from when I just entered grade school, I would ask myself, when I came home from school, I would kind of be in my room and think. And what I thought was, if we have to die, why do we live in the first place? Why don't we just kill ourselves now? What's the meaning in going to school, learning? Well, maybe to get a job in the future, but what's the meaning in getting a job? Well, maybe to make a living and to raise a family and to have kids. But what's the meaning with that? And I thought, well, Dad knows everything. I was 7, 8 years old, so I thought, well, Dad must know everything, and that's a very simple question. What's the meaning of life? So I went to Dad and asked him, and he said, boy, you're a little philosopher, aren't you? Why don't you go and ask the teachers at school? So I went to, next day I went to grade school, and the teachers, they made a funny face, and they said, well, we don't teach that here at grade school, wait until you go to junior high or high school. But even at the age of 16, I didn't find that in the school books. What actually topic of the classes? Why do we live? And also had the feeling that my friends, nobody was really interested in this question. At one point I thought, well, maybe never had anybody asked this question before. But then when I read the story of the Buddha, I realized, oh no, I'm certainly not the first one. 2,500 years ago, there was already this prince, Shakyamuni, who probably had a similar question. And obviously, he found the answer under the holy tree and passed it on. So when I was, well, 17, I already knew that, well, this is one thing that I want to do in my life. Go to Japan and become a Zen monk and pursue this way. Originally, I had a thought that I would go directly to Japan after high school and become a Zen monk right away. But when I asked my original teacher, who told me he's a Zen, had quit the school already at the time, I told him that actually after reading all these books on Zen, I had made up my mind and I would become a Zen monk after graduating from high school. And maybe he felt some kind of responsibility, but he now then kind of said, wait a minute, that's fine that you're very enthusiastic and, well, you're burning with that wish to practice Zen now, but who knows how you feel in 3 years or 5 years. Maybe you get stuck and you want to go back to Germany, but if you don't have some kind of education first, if you don't go to college or university first, there might not be many other options once you get stuck in the monastery. So why don't you first go to university? You can study Japanese there, and then after finishing university, you can still go. So for a second time, I was fooled by this teacher, and I changed my mind and said, okay, I'm gonna go to university. In Germany, you graduate from high school usually around June, before the summer holidays, and then you can enter a university either in October or in April. Either way, you have at least 3 or 4 months before you enter university. So I decided at age 19, when I graduated from high school, to go to Japan for only 3 months. At first, I did a homestay in Utsunomiya, which is in Tochigi-ken. I think it's not so far away from Tsukuba. And the family where I stayed happened to be a Christian family. There's not so many Christians in Japan, maybe 1%. But that family that took me, they were Christians. And I think they were looking forward to have this boy from Germany, the country of Luther, and maybe hear something about the teaching of Protestant Christianity, while I, on the other hand, I was going to Japan to learn something about Buddhism. I went there and told them, here, can you teach me about Zen? And they were taken aback because they thought that I could teach them something about Christianity. And as I was also interested in Japanese culture on the whole and everything that was somehow related to Zen, I asked, well, can I hear some shakuhachi music? Where do I have to go to hear shakuhachi music? And the father there in that family, he put a record on an old record player and said, hey, listen to this. This is real music. And from the loudspeakers, there was Bach playing. So for them, that was real music. For me, well, then everything connected to Zen was a real thing. So at first, I was a little bit disappointed that I couldn't find it there in the family Utsunomiya. So after a month or so, I hitchhiked to Kyoto, and there's lots of, especially Rinzai Zen temples. At least seven big training monasteries in the Rinzai tradition in Kyoto. And they all have beautiful Zen gardens. If you pay 500 yen entrance fee, you can see the Zen gardens. But I was not successful in finding a place that would accept me for the real Zen training. So when I went back to Germany and entered university, I was a little bit disappointed by this first experience of Zen in Japan, but I thought, well, I'm going to study Japanese, and once I know Japanese, it might be easier to find a place where I can practice. And in Germany at that time, they didn't have something that would correspond to the bachelor in America. So once you enter university, you have to at least get a master's degree before you can graduate. And that would take, well, depends on you. You have to get all the degrees, and then you have to write the thesis. It can take 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Some of the students there in Berlin, they were in their 40s. So at the time, the German government didn't put much pressure on people. University was free. I think there's discussion going on now in America. If you should pay for university. In Germany, it was always kind of taken for granted that you can study for free and you can study for as long as you want. My parents studied until they were 30, but I enjoyed studying at the university, but also I wanted to become a Zen monk as fast as possible. So when I was 22, I was still enrolled in university. It was still far away from getting the master's, but I decided to take 1 year off and go once more to Kyoto to study as an exchange student in Kyoto. And I had hoped to find this time a Zen temple, maybe one of the main Rinzai temples that would accept me for training, maybe in the evening and in the morning, for early morning sitting. But again, I was not successful. But I was given the name of Shohaku Okumura, who is now in Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana. But at that time, he was each month he was giving a Dharma talk in Kyoto. I got that name in Berlin at one of the dojos I was practicing as a student. I was practicing several times a week in a dojo in Berlin. And before I went to Kyoto, I asked, well, do you have any addresses in Kyoto? So they gave me the name of Okumura Roshi. And I went to the monthly talk in Kyoto, and then I heard that he actually offered a 5-day session every month that was not inside Kyoto city itself, but about 1 hour with the train from Kyoto to a small temple called Treeleaf. So I went to the session every month. And the session there were very different from the sessions I knew in Europe. I mean, in Europe there's quite different styles. The first style of Zen that I experienced, that was in high school, was a kind of Christian Zen. It was a Christian school. And Christian Zen is something that's pretty strong in Germany. It was started by a Catholic priest called La Salle, who died about already 20 years ago, I think. But there's still quite a number of Catholic priests, also some Protestant ministers that practice Zen, and they try to combine it with their Christian belief. That's how I started. But then in Berlin, I joined one of the dojos in the Deshimaru tradition, which is also part of the Sawaki tradition in the wider sense. So they put quite an emphasis on the right posture. And there's usually quite a large amount of people in those groups. So in Berlin there was about 50 people, and the sessions were held several times a year outside in the countryside, and there would be sometimes 200 people coming for a session. It was always stacked, and people were sitting in several rows. So the first row would sit facing the wall, the second row would be facing the backs of the first row, the third row would be facing 2 rows of backs. Another thing is kind of unique to this tradition, that the leader is always giving kusen. There's always talk during the sitting. So you always would have something to listen to during the Zen. And the session that I participated in Shorinji was Antaiji style. Okumura's teaching the Antaiji tradition. Session started 4 in the morning, and there's 14 hours. And now in Antaiji there are 15 hours. At the time it was 14 hours until 9 in the evening. 3 meals and no talks. No teisho, no cleaning, no work, no bath, no full-off, no shower, nothing. And when I arrived there were only 3 people except myself. I arrived the night before the session started, so I asked, well, when are all the people coming? They said, what are you talking about? We're all there. So I was 4. So it was the first time for me to sit with only 4 people, each person sitting in one corner, complete silence. At first I was waiting, when does the kusen start? When does the talk start? There's no talk, nothing. But I liked that. I got to like that style, and I realized this is much closer to the original spirit of, say, Bodhidharma, sitting in his cave, facing the wall. So I came back for these sessions each month, and I spent 2 months summer holidays in Shorinji, in Okumura's Roshi's place. And then in the autumn I was supposed to go back to Kyoto and finish another half year of studies in Kyoto. But I felt that life in the monastery, in the Zen temple, was much more fulfilling than the studies in Kyoto. So I asked Okumura if it was possible to practice full time. And he said, well, if you want to do that, why don't you go to Antaiji? It's a little further off at the coast of the Japanese Sea, but that's where I trained when I was young, and when Uchiyama Roshi was still the abbot. So I could give you an introduction. That's how I first got there, 24, now already 25 years ago, 1990. Was just after a big typhoon had hit the area, and the complete road from the bus stop, it takes about 4 kilometers, about 1 hour to walk up from the bus stop. But that road had been washed away, so there was a monk that had come up down the mountain to pick me up and show me the way, but we had to kind of, how would you say, creep up the mountain, because there was actually no road to walk. And it was raining on that day as well, so when we arrived up there, it was completely wet, so I was offered to enter the ofuro, the bath. the water was brown because the dam where we get the water from was also filled with muds and trees. If you opened the tap in the kitchen, it was looked like coffee which came out of the tap. So I was a little surprised. Was very different from the life I knew from Kyoto. It was also different from Shorinji. And after the bath, I was invited to tea by the then Abbot, Miyaura Roshi. And he would ask me, why have you come to Antaiji? And I said, I came here to learn about Buddhism, to learn about Zen. And to that he would say, we are not a school. You have to create Antaiji. You create Abbot. That was the first thing he told me, although he knew that I was just a student and I would leave after 6 months in the spring. But well, that's what he told me. You are creating Abbot. And that inspired me quite a lot. Oh, I'm creating Antaiji. It's not that Antaiji already exists and I just follow what my senior students, my senior Dharma brothers tell me, but it's actually up to me what I can learn here. But then it wasn't as easy as I thought. There's a lot of work to be done. There's also a lot of events. We sit 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and then we have a total of 9 session days each month. But even harder than Zazen for me was the work, because Antaiji has no parish. We live self-sufficient. There's vegetable fields, rice fields that need to be taken care of. Here you can see the wood stove burning. So in the winter we have this wood stove that keeps us warm, and we need wood for that, but also in the kitchen. We don't have gas, but we're cooking on wood stoves. So a lot of trees need to be cut, wood needs to be chopped, and as a university student, I never was really into sport, so I've never lifted anything heavier than a book of philosophy. So physically it was really hard for me. In the winter then we're closed off. Right now it's the same. Cars can't reach here from December to the end of March. And it's quite cold. So it wasn't easy, but it was basically what I've been looking for, this kind of life. So when I went back to Berlin the next spring, I knew this is why I want to come back. I want to come back here and become a monk. And after I graduated, I finished my master's. I wrote my master's thesis on Dogen's Genjo Koan. And after I graduated, I came back. That was in 1993. And after 6 months, the Abbot allowed me to ordain, and I became a full-fledged monk. But after that, it became even harder for me. The first 6 months, they were okay, but then after I ordained, it became even harder. One of the things that I had great difficulties with was the tenzo, being the cook. In Germany, I'd never really cooked. As a student, I would eat 1 bowl of oatmeal in the morning and then 1 bowl of oatmeal in the evening with milk, oats and milk, and that was basically it. I didn't really need more than that. And you would think that in a Zen monastery the food is also simple, and it is to a certain degree, but then the Japanese, they enjoy to eat well, even in a Zen monastery. So, well, we don't eat so well compared to like in an urban situation. We have only brown rice, miso soup, and then 2 vegetable dishes. But then Japanese are quite specific in how those are prepared. How you kind of, how would you say, the taste, how much soy sauce, for example, you use. There's something called dashi that you use to cook things. At first, I wasn't even aware that something like dashi exists. Like when I made miso, I thought I would just mix the miso soup with the water and then heat it. People would tell me, well, where's the dashi? What is dashi? Dashi is something, well, that you mix in there to give, well, broth, I think, to give it a certain taste. And at lunch, often we have noodles. There's 3 kinds of noodles in Japan. Udon is kind of a thick version. Soba, that's buckwheat noodles, and somen, those are very thin noodles. And they're all, well, prepared in a different way. They need a different time to get ready. Usually udon take the longest time. And at first, when it was my first day of being the cook, I thought, well, I'll make them like spaghetti al dente. But that was too hard for my Dharma brothers. So after lunch, they, well, complained, those udon are too hard. You're not supposed to chew them. You kind of slurp them, eat them like that. So they shouldn't be too hard. So the next day I thought, okay, I'll make them really soft. They cooked them for half an hour and they dissolved. So it was some kind of glue. And of course, nobody was happy with that either. So again, I had to listen to the criticism of my Dharma brothers. So I talked back and said, well, actually, I haven't come here to learn about cooking. I came here to learn about Buddhism. And my teacher, who heard that, said in a quite loud voice, you don't count at all. It's not about you. In a Japanese context, that's quite a matter of course. Well, that's the kind of response you would get, because obviously practice is not only about sitting the Zen and reading books and maybe doing sadhu, but when you're the cook, then the practice is how can I make the best meal possible? How can I make something that's enjoyable to all, even if food is not so important to me? In a way, it's a big koan. So if you say, well, I'm interested in the Zen and cooking is not my thing, then of course you get this kind of response. It's not about you. But in the beginning, it was very hard for me to accept that kind of feedback, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, my teacher told me, you create antaiji. Well, if I create antaiji, how can it be that it's not about me? I'm supposed to create antaiji. It's all about me. It took me some time to realize that these 2 things, you create antaiji and you don't count at all. It's not about you. They belong together. It's only possible to create antaiji or to create my life if at the same time I forget about myself. So, for example, right now we're 10 people here in Antaiji. If each of these 10, if each of us would create only their own antaiji, it would be impossible to live together. To create one antaiji together, with each 10 of us actually participating in this process of creating, each of us also has to forget about themselves and look around and see what do the others need in this situation. What can I do for the others? Only in this way can I create antaiji. So in retrospect, maybe those were the 2 most important things that I learned from my teacher. That's I am the one that creates antaiji. If I don't do it, nobody's going to do it for me. But for that, I have to completely forget about myself. So it's not me that is creating antaiji with following my own ideas, but I have to forget those ideas to be able to create antaiji in the first place. Altogether, I stayed 8 years in antaiji with my teacher from 1993 to 2001, and at that point I had Shiho, the Dharma transmission. Shiho, of course, doesn't mean that you have to leave your teacher, but basically one thing it means is, well, you can stand on your own. You could, if you wanted to, take responsibility for temple in Japan. You can also have your own students when you have Shiho. My idea was that I would eventually go back to Germany and start some kind of dojo in Germany. But as a matter of fact, there's already quite a number of groups in Germany, in Europe, in America. If I had gone back to Berlin, there would have been at least a dozen of Buddhist groups, at least in Zen tradition. And if you include Vipassana groups, Tibetan groups, there's probably about 50 or so places where you can practice Buddhist meditation. And also in the countryside, if you have a medium-sized town, there's good chances that you will find at least one meditation group there. And in Japan, of course, there's lots of Zen temples. In the Soto school alone, there's 15,000 Zen temples. But we from the West often imagine that each of these temples has their Sangha and there's some practice going on there. And actually, that's not the case. Most of these temples have a parish. There's a priest living there, usually with his family, who's taking care of the parish, who's taking care of funerals, Buddhist memorial services. But most of these temples don't have a Zen group. They have no functioning Zen Sangha. If there's a Zen at all, then it might be once a month, on the third Sunday of each month in the afternoon. There's one round of sitting and there's a chat with the priest, and then it's over. So there's not so many Zen temples in Japan where you can actually practice Zazen. And I know of very few temples where you can practice Zazen daily. Antaiji is one of those few temples, but Antaiji is very far off in the mountains, so it's impossible for people in the city that have a job or for students at university to come here and Antaiji regularly, several times a week. It's just not possible. So I thought before I go back to Germany, I want to start a Western-style Zen group in Japan, somewhere in the city, where people can join me for the Zen every morning, or maybe in the evenings. But I didn't have any money. So I didn't have any money to rent a place, or didn't even have money to stay on my own, to rent an apartment for myself in, say, Tokyo or Osaka, were the two cities I was thinking of. So to rent a place where a group of people could sit was out of the question. So when I was thinking about what to do, and I was taking a path around Osaka Castle, there's a big park there, and at the time there were lots of people living in that park, homeless people. They had built tents with blue sheets, and about, I think, 800 people or so at that time, that's 13 years ago, were living in the park in Osaka. There's all these people living there under the trees. I realized, well, actually, that's much closer to what Shakyamuni did 2,500 years ago than what many temple priests do today in Japan. So rather than try to look for a place to rent, why don't I join these people and also build a tent in the park and practice a Zen here? So I went to one of those tents and asked, well, is it okay if I also stay here and then have my own tent? I asked one of these homeless people, and they say, oh, please go ahead. Do as you like. So that was in 2001, just after 9/11. It was, I think, September 13th, 2 days after 9/11, that I built up my tent and started my own Zazen group. And of course, at first, nobody knows about the group, so I sit basically on my own every morning. But then I went to an internet cafe. I built my own first homepage. I said, on the homepage, I'm this German monk who sits every morning from 6 to 8, Osaka Park. If you like, please join me. I'm talking too long?
No, no, no. Well, I want to make sure that we have time for questions.
Yes, until when do we have to get finished? be finished?
I had said we would go to 9:30. It's more your bedtime or anything. Maybe we could take questions for about 20 minutes. Would that be?
Oh, okay. So it's 10:20 now. When do you want to be finished?
Whenever you wish.
Well, I have time. I have time. Okay, I'll try to finish as fast as possible. So I started this group in Osaka at first alone, but then, well, there was maybe two, there was three people on some days. It got cold in the winter. We were sitting outside of the tent. But, well, there was a number of people sitting with me over the winter, and I began to like that life in Osaka very much because, well, first of all, 24 hours of the day were mine. And here in Antalya, from 4 in the morning, we get up 3:45. Then from 4 in the morning, there's a Zen, and there's breakfast, there's cleaning up, there's Samu. After Samu, you have barely time to have your bath, and then there's dinner, and then there's evening sitting. And then you try to get to bed as early as possible. So although that practice is your time, you often feel, or I often feel as like a slave. I had no time for myself. And Osaka was, all of the day was my time. I didn't own that space where I was living, but if people would have kicked me out, if the police would have told me to leave, or I could have gone somewhere else. So I felt completely free. And actually, in December or so, I fell in love with one of the girls that had come to the Zazenkai. So I had a girlfriend for the first time in 10 years. That was also very enjoyable about the life there. I was dating her, starting to date her. Or actually, well, she was, after a while, she started to live with me in the tent. We were living there together. From, well, the beginning of 2002. And in February 14th, on Valentine's Day, we had an appointment in the evening, but in the afternoon I get this call on my prepaid handy from one of my Dharma brothers that my teacher, the Abbot, was involved in an accident with the bulldozers, moving snow with bulldozer, had an accident and was in the hospital. And so I went with the next train. In the evening, I reached Hamasaka, the next town. He was already dead in the hospital. And at the time, there were few people in Antaiji. All those who had Dharma transmission. I was the fifth one. I was the last one who had Dharma transmission from our teacher. My four seniors had already left Antaiji and taken care of temple. So I was asked to take care of the temple until the spring, so that people could discuss who's going to be the next abbot. But then in the spring, no decision was made, and finally they said, well, maybe even a gaijin, maybe you, as a foreigner, maybe even you can do it. Why don't you do it? And I said, well, if you don't want to do it, I'm fine. It's an honor. So I moved back to Antaiji. I broke down those tents in Osaka. I proposed to my then a girlfriend, who's now my wife. We have two kids together, and well, I've been living here for the last 13, 14 years as the abbot. And there would be more to talk about, but I also want to give you the opportunity to raise some questions, and maybe I can say then more connected to those questions that you asked. So first, thank you for listening for this 30, 40 minutes to my talk.
Thank you, Muho, and very, very, very interesting story how you came there. Now I'm going to ask folks, we also have some people at home who can email me with any questions now. Wave your hands like crazy if you have a question, and I'll pick you. So, all right. Aske from Sweden. Make sure your microphone is. Let me make sure. Is your microphone on?
It's on. It's on. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I hear you.
Thank you. You spoke about single-mindedness a lot, about knowing what one wanted to do with one's life. So I wanted to ask you, when we go about our business, whatever that may be, we have lots of desires, lots of wanting to do things.
Yes.
So how to figure out if that wish or want that one has is actually genuine, if it's good, and one should go on with it, or if it's merely something, some ego-produced thing that you should forget about. If there is something one can do to check that.
Okay, thank you. Single-mindedness. When we do one thing, how can we be sure that that's really the thing that we want to do and it's not something completely else? Well, I think there's no other way to first completely do that one thing that you're doing. And, well, you might realize that after a while that's not what you wanted to do, but if right from the start you're doing that, but at the same time you're already eyeing something else, so you're kind of, for example, you go to Antaiji because you think that's what you do, but then at Antaiji you spend your days, say, reading books on Tibetan Buddhism because that also sounds interesting. Maybe you also want to do that. And you actually decide after 6 months that you want to go to Tibet. And so you do that. But then you go to Tibet, and what do you do there? You start to read books on Theravada because maybe that's also interesting. If you do that, you would probably never find the thing that you really want to do. Or it's the same like with a relation. You find a girlfriend, and you love her, but you think, well, maybe out there, there's someone there, there's another girl that is even better for me. So you're dating her, but you also keep your eyes open for other possibilities. So probably it won't work out with that, but it won't work out with the other possibilities either, because you never completely give yourself up to that one thing that you're facing. So I think that's basically single-mindedness, and it even works for the small things that we do, like, well, cleaning. If you clean, how can you do that single-mindedly? Well, just by completely doing that one thing. Not even that sometimes that's something that we do when we are in a meditative environment. We watch ourselves while we clean. We try to be aware of ourselves while we're cleaning, and we realize when we do that, we are never really in the cleaning because there's always this circle. So when we clean in Antaiji, I tell people, well, first of all, try to clean as fast as possible, but just because you're fast, don't make a lot of sound, noise. Try to do it as fast as possible, but be quiet. And although it's about mindfulness, we're wasting time if you clean the same floor, same corridor twice. So be aware where the others are cleaning. Make sure that the whole area is clean, but none of these areas are cleaned 2 times or 3 times. And if that's where your focus is, you try to do it as fast as possible, but also you're quiet, and you're aware of your surroundings, what the other people do and what you do in that moment, then naturally you have to become single-minded. So, well, cleaning is a kind of example from everyday life, but when you ask kind of more general questions, well, what do I want to do with my life in the first place? Well, start one thing, do that completely, and after so much time you would realize, probably will realize it's the thing for you. Probably will never find one thing that will always keep you happy. Like during these 25 years that passed since I first came to Antaiji, was never that I was really completely happy in Antaiji. That was quite some years where I thought about leaving and asked myself, why don't I take the next bus? But then I said, well, okay, there's one bus at noon, but let's skip that bus and I'll take the bus in the evening. But then in the evening I said, well, it's already late. Let's wait until tomorrow. There's another bus in the morning. There were 3 buses that time. And I was kind of fooling myself in that way for quite some weeks, some months, sometimes at a time. So sometimes you have to do that as well. I see that in the relation with my wife. It's not like from the time that we fell in love until now, those 13 years, we've all been kind of really in love and kind of, oh, sweetheart, sweetheart, but there's also difficult times. But if you have a certain gut feeling that even if it's hard, this is my thing, and that there's no other alternative, or even though there are alternatives, if I switch now and pursue another alternative, still I'm going to get stuck. So why not just go straight here right now? At least in my case, in most cases, that got me further. So, well, at least in the case of the Zen, that gave me the gut feeling. That's what I want to do. And when I came to Antaiji, I knew this is the place. I even thought it's been hard during those 25 years. I tried my best to just do what I'm doing. That's what I'm still doing now. I don't know if it answers the question, but.
Anyone else? Please wave your hands. All right, I have a question from home. I'm going to actually combine 2 questions. Adrian would like to know, how do you balance being both the abbot of Antaiji and a husband and father? And I also say that in our Sangha, because we have people practicing at home, we try to tell people that they can be tenzo in their own kitchen. Changing a diaper is a sacred ceremony. It's the same as the great morning ceremony at Sojiji, to change your baby's diaper if you do it with sacredness. But I'd like to ask you about that and Adrian's question, how do you balance being abbot and husband and father?
Yeah, thank you. That's, for me, that's a big core. Because as Jundoda said, of course, family life, being a father, being a husband is practice. So it's not that you have to balance practice and family life. There's nothing to balance. Family life is practice. But my responsibilities as the abbot do not allow me to be with my family so much. For example, during the sessions, at the start of each month, there's a 5-day session. And from 4 to 9, I'm basically with the Sangha, so I have not so much time to see my kids during these 5 days, although they're living just next door from the meditation hall. They're not living far away, but they know Dad is now meditating. They don't hardly see me for 5 days. During the winter, it's impossible for them to stay here at Antaiji because of the snow. They can't go to school from here. So from December to March, they live in a house that's 20 kilometers from here. And I see them, well, I spent New Year's with them, and I'm going to see them again in February, and then they're going to come back at the end of March. But during the winter, I don't see them so much. So it's going to be a whole month until February, and then I'll only see them shortly, and then I'm going to see them again after a month in March. So as I have only, well, 24 hours during the day and 365 days during the year, sometimes I have to make a decision, do I spend this time with the Sangha or with the family? If I spend it with my family, well, maybe some people in the Sangha might ask himself, well, why did we come all the way to Antarctica to practice with Muho if Muho is always changing diapers? On the other hand, if I stay this winter for 3 months with the Sangha without seeing my wife, she asks herself, of course, why did I marry Muho and have 3 kids with him if he's sitting there in the mountain talking about the Buddha Dharma and I'm sitting here alone and caring for the 3 kids. So often it's a compromise. At least I feel sometimes that I have to make a compromise, and when I invest myself with my family, I feel I could be doing more for the Sangha. When I spend time with the Sangha, sometimes I feel could be spending more time with the family. Of course, there's also occasions where the family can join the Sangha. For example, when we have a party or so, but it would be realistic to have my 3-year-old son join us during a session, for example. Most of the summer it's not possible for the kids to join. Sometimes that's possible. So sometimes I use these chances, try to use the chance to also combine family and the Sangha, but often it's not possible. So yeah, it's not easy for me. It's not easy for me, and well, maybe that's why the Buddha said, don't have a family, leave home. And that's what most of the Asian continental Buddhists practice. In Japan, we're trying to find other ways in the West. I think a lot of Buddhists follow the Japanese tradition. They try to combine family life with the Buddhist practice. I don't think it's impossible, but it's very hard. But just because it's harder to go on doesn't mean it's not worth trying. At least I want to try it, and I don't regret having a family and being here. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity, although it's sometimes hard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please wave your hand with a question. Anyone at all? Shinzan. Let me get your microphone on there. Hold on. Let me unmute your. Whoops.
That's fine.
There you are.
Good. Muho-san.
Hi.
Could you talk a little bit more about how it was to work with your teacher and what that experience was like?
Yeah, thank you. Difficult question. Difficult because there's always the kind of well, in Japanese you have tatemai, or kind of the omote, and the ura, the kind of the surface, the facade, and what is behind that facade. So kind of, I'm sure there's also some way to express it in English, but kind of, you can talk about it in a clean way, nice way, about all the beautiful aspects of being in a teacher-student relation, but then also there's quite a lot in that teacher-student relation that is not so enjoyable for both sides. So I learned a lot of from my teacher. I'm very grateful to my teacher that he took me as a student, and I wouldn't be the Muho that I am today without my teacher. And I learned those things that I talked about before from my teacher. On the other hand, my teacher was only a human being. And, well, from the old times, I think from the times of Sawaki, there's been sometimes quite a lot of drinking going on. In Antalya, my teacher loved to drink a lot. And sometimes I felt it's actually quite impossible to approach him when he's not drunk. So when he was drunk, it was easy to talk to him, but it was really hard to find him and have a discussion with the Buddha Dharma when he's sober. He loved to smoke as well. He had a wife, because as I'm married now, would also get angry with the students quite a lot. So sometimes I ask myself, well, the teacher is supposed to be kind of your role model, the kind of the substitute for the Buddha. It would be ideal if we could learn directly from the Buddha, but the Buddha died 2,500 years ago. But we have the teacher, so we look up to the teacher as the role model. But often when I look to my teacher, I couldn't see much of a role model there. But then my teacher wasn't the kind of guy to whom you could really discuss this and kind of, hey teacher, let's talk about our relationship. But at one point, my teacher's teacher is still alive. He retired from Antalya for a while. He went to Italy, but then he came back to Japan. He's living a couple of 100 kilometers from Antalya. But I visited my teacher's teacher during the winter break and had a talk with him about all these problems that I could discuss with my direct teacher. And what he told me is, a stupid student will only find a stupid teacher. Normally you would think it's the other way around. If you have a stupid teacher, he will attract only stupid students. Dogen Zenji uses the example of the carpenter. If you give a carpenter a high quality piece of wood, but if it's a bad carpenter, he would mess that wood. If it's a good carpenter, even if the wood is not so good, he will make some piece of art out of this wood. So Dogen Zenji says it's all the responsibility of the teacher. But what my teacher told me is, well, if you're stupid, you will turn the teacher into something stupid as well. I think we can also see that with the students that the Buddha had. He had hundreds and thousands of students, but not all of them turned into Buddhas. Each of these students turned into something different because they were actually learning from a different Shakyamuni. So my teacher's teacher told me, not only are you creating Antaji, you're also creating the teacher. You are seeing the teacher that you are creating. That was something very, well, eye-opening. That was eye-opening for me. That, well, my teacher, of course, is only a human being, and he has mistakes. He might get angry. He might get drunk. He might not be the best role model, but what I learned, it's up to me. I mean, even this imperfect teacher opens up a lot of possibilities to learn. And sometimes, well, you learn from the mistakes of your teacher. That's also one way of learning, is to learn from the mistakes of your teacher or from the mistakes of your senior students. So it would be foolish for the student to expect the teacher to be perfect. There's the teacher, the perfect teacher, and if I study with my teacher for several years, then I will gradually also become perfect just as my teacher. That's not the case. At least that's not for the experience that I had. And after all these years, of course, I'm not perfect myself. So I have to tell my students the same. That, well, sorry, but this is the Muho you have to deal with. I'm not perfect, but it's up to you to learn from this imperfect Muho. I'll try my best. But I won't be perfect, even trying my best. But it's up to you to try to even better. Yeah. Well, maybe so much to this question. If I didn't answer it, maybe ask more.
Thank you. We have another question from home, someone who would like to be anonymous. Because of a serious health problem, they have to sit in many different postures, including reclining Zazen. And they want to know about that. I'm going to also combine it with another question. In our Sangha, we have busy people at home, and I tell them they can even sit 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If they sit beyond time, beyond long and short, sit as if every moment is Buddha. But of course, at Antaiji, you're sitting hour, an hour, an hour. And I tell them long sitting is long, short sitting is short. Sit beyond long and short. When you can, sit long, but if you need to sit short, sit beyond time. That's what I tell folks. So I'd like to ask you about people who, for example, this fellow needs to recline, or people who are only sitting for 10, 15 minutes at a time. What is your feeling?
That's completely okay with me. 5 minutes a day, I don't see any problem. So if people ask me, for example, they've been in Antalya for some time, but now they're going back home, they want to continue with their practice, how should I continue? I think maybe they're thinking about setting their alarm clock to 3:45 a.m. But if they try to sit from 4 to 6 each morning after they get back home, they might be able to do that for 3 days, but then they stop. So it's easier to start with 5 minutes, sit concentrated for 5 minutes every day. And if you feel like doing more, then you go and sit 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's not really about the length of time, but that you're there and that you spend this time concentrated. And what is even more important than Zazen is what you do after Zazen. So even if you sit for 2 hours at a stretch without Kinhin, and of course we do Kinhin after each hour, but even if you work kind of Zazen Superman, you sit for 2 hours, 3 hours without Kinhin, but then you're not concentrated, you're not in your life after you get up. Well, what's the meaning to these 2 or 3 hours of Zazen? So just as Jundo said, it's not about long or short. Although from my experience, it can be sometimes actually easier to sit for a longer time than only sit 5 minutes to kind of somehow get into the meditation. Like when we sat for 25 minutes an hour ago, I sensed some kind of change after 10, 15 minutes. It got easier. It was in the beginning I was kind of tense, also a new situation facing the computer. So sometimes can be actually easier if you sit for some time. About the posture, also of course, not everybody can sit in lotus, not everybody can sit in Burmese. I had people in Antalya sitting on a chair. I don't encourage that, but if people can't sit on the floor, they can sit on the chair. And if people can't sit in full lotus, they can sit in half lotus. If that's not possible, you can sit Burmese. You can sit in a Caesar position with a cushion under your buttocks. The only thing that people need to be aware of, that even on a chair they will have pain. Even lying down, eventually you experience pain. I think Dogen says that somewhere. If you try to sit in the most comfortable posture possible, you will always be uncomfortable. So that we need to be aware of, that we, at one point, we will get to that point where it's not comfortable, and we want to change, we want to switch. And I think it's vital at that point to just continue on, just as with the first question that Aske from Sweden asked, how do I know that this is really the thing that I want to do, or how do I know that this is really the girl that I love? Sometimes you just have to carry on even when it's hard, it's difficult, it's painful. And that can be on a chair, it can be lying down, but sometimes in Zen we use this phrase about the great death. You have to die on the cushion. And it sounds a little bit over the top, but I think it actually expresses the experience quite well that you can have, for example, during a session, or even on the day-to-day Zazen. Sometimes it's difficult and you feel, this might be killing me. And, well, maybe in a situation like that, it's good to switch if it's really a physical problem, but often it's a psychological problem. And if it's only your mind that's aware of giving itself up. From my experience, it's good at that point to say, well, okay, if I die, why not die now? Sometimes I tell that people before the session in Antalya start. I tell them, okay, tomorrow 5-day session. Now you're all enthusiastic about it, but in 2 days, in 3 days, you might think about leaving, or you might even think about dying. You might think that you die, but there's nothing to worry about, because behind the Zen door there's a graveyard and there's still lots of space for you. So in case that you die during the session, I'm happy to have a funeral for you after the session is over. So feel free to die. But during those 25 years that I've come, and nobody has died during the Zen, including myself. And that's not because people will never make that effort, but even if you make that, well, effort is not the wrong word. It's not an effort, but you give up. You give up to the posture, and you say, even if I die, I'm going to sit here. In that moment, it gets very easy. Maybe some of you have made that experience already. That the moment you tell yourself, I'm going to die in the Zen, I'm going to die for the Zen, it gets very easy, because you don't have to do anymore. You realize that it's not you that does the Zen, but the Zen is doing the Zen for you. The Zen is doing it with your body and mind. Doesn't take away the whole pain, but at that point of time, the pain doesn't matter anymore so much, because, well, even if the pain kills me, so what? I have to die at one point of time, so why not now, during this period of the Zen? So what I just said might not be so, how do you say, practical in certain situations where you actually have a physical problem and you're hitting your physical limits. At that point of time, it's certainly better to look for different posture, maybe switch the posture even during the Zen, although I don't recommend that. I usually tell people, well, sit until the end of the sitting, and after Kinhin, if you have to take another posture, look for different posture, and even if it's on a chair. But as I said, even on the chair, you will have pain, and at one point of time, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to die for this? And only if the answer is yes, then I think you can really practice Kantasa, or Dogen Zen talks about Shinjin Datsuna, the body and mind dropping off in this practice.
Anyone at home? Group 1, Group 2? Wave your hand. All right. Going once, going twice. Then I guess we'll finish with a question from Catherine, which is who's writing from home. She's watching. In response to your comment about thinking about leaving on the bus, I have this question. Was there a point when you realized that you had chosen the right path and no longer thought about leaving on the bus?
Well, to be honest, after 2 years after our dates, that was in 1995, I got on the bus and left. Well, I discussed it with my teacher, with my senior students, with the senior Dharma brothers. One of them told me, well, maybe anti-easy practice isn't hard enough for you yet. And he recommended that I go to a Rinzai temple. He introduced me to a Rinzai temple in Kyoto. And Rinzai has a reputation of being, well, even harder than Soto Zen. Soto Zen can be pretty hard, but in Rinzai Zen there's a lot of beating with the Kyosaku stick. You don't get much sleep. So in the temple where I went, we were sitting until 11 p.m. and then next morning we get at 3. So there's 4 hours of sleep only. Also, you can't decide how much you eat. So it's a little bit like boot camp. Your seniors force you to eat until you vomit. That's also part of the practice. After session, people would boast about how many Kyosaku sticks they break. And different monasteries in Kyoto, they would kind of compete. The hardest or the most severe Myoshinrin, they would boast that they would break 100 Kyosaku sticks during each session, each 7 days. So you got 14, an average of 14 sticks that break. And where I went, it was a little bit less. But every so many periods, there would be a stick breaking from being hit too hard on somebody's back. And was also my back involved. And in that environment, I had this funny realization. Up to that point, I was always asking me the question that maybe also Aski from Sweden is asking yourself: what do I really want to do with my life? Or what I asked myself as a kid: why am I alive? Why don't I kill myself? So for me, life was always a problem. I'm alive, okay, but why? What am I doing with this life? And in that situation, I was always prepared that maybe I'm not alive tomorrow. Maybe I'm not going to experience tomorrow. I might not see tomorrow. But I'm alive still, and it's miraculously that I'm still alive. I could have died yesterday. That's true for all of us, but usually that doesn't really seem realistic. But in that situation, and I spent 1 year in that monastery before I left, that was always it felt always realistic. I could be dying. And actually, every couple of years, also in Japan, you hear about people actually beaten to death in Zen monasteries. Usually, people try to keep that under the carpets. But well, you hear from friends and people that actually, again, a couple of months ago, somewhere somebody was beaten, either had to be hospitalized or actually died. So it's I might be exaggerating now a little bit, but not too much. It's actually you feel a danger. But at the same time, I felt, but wow, I'm still alive, and isn't that a great gift? And when I went back to Antalya, I felt that, well, whatever might happen from now on in Antalya, it's not going to kill me, and I can handle it. I can do it. And even if the situation is never perfect, it's up to me to make it better. So, as my teacher told me, you create Antalya. So I would say, well, it took me from 1993, when I ordained, to say 1996, about 3 years to have this realization. But during those first 3 years, there was a lot of kind of going here, going there in my mind, kind of, should I stay or should I go? Kind of just like the famous Clash song. I wasn't really quite sure. But then in 1996, after that 1 year in the Windsor Temple, and when I came back to Antalya, I knew now I'm going to stay here until I have Chiho. And then when I went to the park, I had my mind set on staying in the park as long as the police will tolerate me there. And now, back in Antalya, I've got my mind set to stay here until I have somebody who's going to take the job from me, who says I'm going to be the next Abbot.
All right, unless anyone has a pressing question, a life-changing question. All right, in that case, Muho, I'm going to thank you very much for coming to join us today, and I hope it's not the last time when you're all snowed in up there. And
yeah, thank you for having me.
We're always here for you. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today, and I think, what time are you getting up in the morning?
And normally it would be, well, in the winter actually it's 5 that the Zen starts. From spring to autumn it's 4, but in the winter we're 1 hour late, and today was a 1-day session. So tomorrow we have a Hosan, we sleep until late. Breakfast tomorrow will be at 8, so I still have, if I would get to bed now, I would still have 9 hours to sleep. More than I need.
Okay, well, I don't feel so bad since you're slacking off so much. So.
Yeah. So tomorrow, that's still 5 of us sitting here. So, well, there's Soji that's cleaning up at 7, but well, we can 8 hours of sleep is about like 20 more.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll ask everyone to be in Gasho and to wish you a good night. Thank you, Muho.
Good. Thank you. Have a good day or good night or whatever time it is in your location. Thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Muho.